I agreed to have a child with an Arab man for $1 million in order to save my brother's life. Now I'm pregnant, scared, and lying. I've decided to make the most dangerous decision of my life. The silence in the penthouse of the Burj Al Arab was almost offensive. The panoramic windows showcased Dubai in all its glory, lights flickering in the warm night air. Camila Rodriguez, elegant and immaculate in a tailored black jumpsuit, sat across from Khalid Al Hassan, the Saudi billionaire known for his ruthless business dealings and invisible personal life. He watched her in silence for a few seconds before speaking, as though weighing the impact of his next words. "I want to propose something to you," he said, in the same tone one would use to present an investment. "A contract. You carry my child. No emotional involvement, no future ties. $1 million. Camilla furrowed her brow, leaning slightly forward. "You're offering me money to have your child. I'm offering a clear deal with no room for misunderstanding. You have the profile I've been looking for months. Discreet, healthy, scandal-free, and with admirable genetics." She leaned back in her chair, trying to figure out if this was a provocation, a joke, or just one of those eccentricities of men with too much power. "You studied me?" she asked, her tone shifting between disbelief and discomfort. "I've studied all the possibilities. I don't want a wife or a fake marriage, just an heir. And I need to ensure that the mother won't try to claim anything afterward." Camilla stared at the man across from her. He was cold, extremely rational, nearly flawless. His face betrayed no hesitation. "And what happens once the child is born?" "You disappear from their life. No contact, no visits, no rights. The contract protects both sides, and your silence will be rewarded." She laughed scornfully, crossing her arms. "This is absurd. How dare you turn motherhood into a business deal?" "It's not motherhood," he replied immediately. "It's biology and efficiency." Camilla stood up and walked over to the glass wall, gazing at the city lights. She felt an impulse to leave the room immediately, but then, in her mind, an image emerged that she tried to bury every day. Arturo, her younger brother, with hollow eyes and a weak voice, fighting a rare disease in a clinic in Switzerland. The treatment was possible, hope existed, but the cost was unreachable. She took a deep breath. She couldn't show weakness. Not there, not in front of him. She turned slowly, her face once again calm. "Do you have a copy of this contract?" Khalid gestured with his hand. An assistant discreetly entered with a dark leather folder. Camilla didn't look at him. She simply took the papers and sat back down, calmly opening the pages. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a final proposal. Cold, direct, with no room for debate. But was it what she needed? That night, already alone in her suite at the same hotel, Camilla stared at the ceiling with her eyes wide open, sitting on the edge of the bed. The contract rested on the nightstand beside her, untouched, as if its mere presence carried weight. Her mind couldn't stop fixating on the image of Arturo, her younger brother, the only real connection she still had to her past. He had been diagnosed with a rare degenerative disease. The experimental therapy in Zurich could save him, but the costs were astronomical. No health insurance, no legal appeal could cover that. The $1 million Khalid was offering, it wasn't just a proposal. It was a salvation. She pressed her fingertips to her temples. She couldn't tell anyone about this, least of all Khalid. Showing vulnerability would mean giving up the little control she still had in this situation. And she couldn't afford to appear weak. He had to believe she was here by choice, not by necessity. 2 days passed. Camilla kept her distance, avoiding any contact with Khalid. She left her room only a few times, walking through the hotel's private areas, her thoughts in disarray. She tried to imagine what it would be like to carry a child for 9 months, to bring a life into the world, and then give it away. Just like that. As if nothing had ever happened. On the morning of the third day, she returned to that same room. The environment was exactly as it had been before. Cold, silent, with a view of the city. Khalid was already waiting for her, sitting upright, his eyes impassive. "Before I sign," Camilla said, placing her hand on the folder with the papers, "I want to know what happens after the birth. The baby will be registered under my full custody. You'll be free after the birth. A legal team will ensure everything stays discreet. No connection will remain between you and the child." Camilla felt a tightness in her chest, a discomfort, almost physical. A knot that rose from her throat, blocking any attempt to maintain the composure she was struggling so hard to hold on to. "So, I just disappear?" she asked in a quieter tone, not looking at him. "Yes." The answer came without hesitation, without emotion. "That's the essence of the deal." She took a deep breath, like someone diving underwater before they lose their breath. She sat down, picked up the pen that was resting on the table, and for a few seconds remained still, staring at the contract. She could still say no. She could leave that room and never look back. But the image of Arturo, pale, weak, smiling despite the pain, it wouldn't let her. She signed, once, twice, 3 times, all the pages. Khalid took the papers when she handed them over. He didn't thank her. He simply gestured to his assistant, who left the room immediately with the documents. He didn't show any reaction, as if everything had unfolded exactly as planned. "From now on, my medical team will take over," he said in a neutral tone. "Exams, monitoring, everything will be organized. The only thing I expect from you is cooperation and discretion." Camilla nodded. But something inside her was no longer the same. What had once seemed like a calculated, impersonal agreement now felt etched into her body and her conscience. If you're still watching up to this point, I'm sure you're enjoying it, so I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel. A few days later, the exams began. Everything was done in private clinics, with confidentiality protocols almost military in their strictness. The best medical teams from Dubai were mobilized, coordinated by specialists from Geneva and London. The embryo transfer was carried out with clinical precision, no improvisation, no room for error, and, as planned, it was a success. Camilla remained silent throughout the process. She responded when necessary, collaborated with the doctors, but kept her eyes distant. There was something mechanical in her gestures, as if her body obeyed out of obligation, but her mind refused to accept the reality. Until the day the test came back positive. Alone in the hospital room with the nurse standing beside her, Camilla looked at the result and couldn't hide the emotion. It wasn't joy, it wasn't fear. It was a silent shock. She was pregnant. Pregnant with a man she barely knew. With a child that, according to the contract, would never be hers. And yet, from that moment on, everything inside her began to change. Khalid was informed on the same day. His response was short. "Great. Continue as per the protocol." No phone call, no visit, just messages mediated by his personal assistant, everything kept in the most professional manner. Camilla, despite everything, wasn't surprised. It was exactly what he had promised from the beginning: coldness, distance, control. And control was everywhere. Her routine was shaped like a military schedule: strict times, meals monitored by nutritionists, weekly sessions with a physiotherapist specialized in pregnancy, prenatal yoga classes, massages, silence, rules, constant monitoring. She now lived in a secluded mansion on the outskirts of Palm Jumeirah with restricted access. It had a view of the sea, a private pool, gardens and servants at her disposal. But it was a gilded prison. Though comfortable, it was impossible to forget that she was there for one single reason. And little by little, something started to happen. Camilla found herself gently stroking her belly. even in the early days when there was no physical sign of the pregnancy. She spent more time in silence, listening to soft music, trying to imagine what that baby's face would look like. A bond began to form, invisible but real, strong, uncontrollable. Khalid observed everything from a distance. He received daily reports, knew every step, every heartbeat, every gram she gained, but he didn't come closer. It was as though he refused to see this as anything human. He treated the process like an investment that needed to be followed through until the return. In the 3rd month, the doctor scheduled a special appointment to listen to the baby's heartbeat. Camilla was lying on the examination table, eyes fixed on the ceiling as the sound filled the room. And for a moment, she forgot everything. She forgot the contract, the money, Khalid. There was only that sound, that small, strong rhythm, a new heart inside her. "It's all normal, strong, healthy," the doctor said, smiling. But Camilla didn't respond. She just bit her lip and nodded, feeling something grow inside her that she didn't know how to contain. Unexpectedly, Khalid was present. He had arrived discreetly minutes before, without announcement. He stood silently during the exam, but the moment the sound of the heartbeat echoed in the room, his posture changed. His gaze, always impenetrable, wavered, and for a fraction of a second, his expression cracked. It wasn't visible emotion. It was a different silence, a kind of respect, or perhaps a first sign of doubt. Camilla noticed, and that, however small, unsettled her, because for the first time, the contract seemed to be losing its strength. In the days following that exam, the sound of the baby's heartbeat continued to echo in her memory like a constant, almost hypnotic tune. But the emotional lightness she felt in that moment soon gave way to a harsher reality. Morning sickness intensified, especially in the early hours of the day. She could barely keep any food in her stomach in the first hours of the morning. The medical team insisted it was normal, part of the process. But for Camilla, that constant feeling of weakness made her feel more vulnerable than she would have liked. It was then that she began to notice certain changes around her. Without fanfare, the morning menu was reworked. Ginger tea replaced coffee. The light in the room began to be regulated before she even woke up, always soft, never harsh. Extra cushions appeared on the sofa in the living room, and the pathways around the mansion grew shorter. Elevators activated, corridors quieter. Camilla didn't ask. No one said anything, but everything screamed a silent truth. Khalid was behind it all. He never mentioned these alterations. His visits remained sparse, formal, but his eyes lingered longer on the details. Sometimes, when he saw her walking more slowly or leaning slightly on a piece of furniture, his gaze would narrow, watching. It was as if, week by week, his indifference was being replaced by attention. Still silent, but present. In the 5th month, Camilla began to experience more frequent dizziness. The doctors monitored everything, but assured her it wasn't serious. Just hormonal adjustments, nothing to worry about. Until the day she left a routine exam and, as she tried to get up from the examination table, everything went white. She collapsed. There was no time to call for anyone. When Khalid arrived at the clinic, summoned urgently by the team, the sight hit him like a punch. Camilla was on the floor, unconscious, her face pale, her breath shallow. Time seemed to slow down. For the first time, he didn't wait for anyone. He knelt beside her, lifted her in his arms with force, and raised her as if her body weighed nothing. "Make way, now," he ordered, his voice the hardest anyone had ever heard. In the ambulance, he stayed by her side. He didn't say a word, but his hand remained tightly around hers the entire time. His once unbreakable gaze now wavered between tension and something new, fear. Hours later, once they reached the hospital, Camilla slowly regained consciousness. The room was quiet, except for the faint beeping of the heart monitor. When she turned her face, she saw Khalid sitting beside her, leaning forward, hands intertwined, his eyes fixed on the floor. "You—" She tried to speak, but her voice failed. He lifted his face immediately. His eyes were red, not from tears. Khalid didn't cry, but from exhaustion and what seemed like a real effort to maintain control. "You scared me," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. She blinked, confused. This was the first time he'd admitted any emotion, any vulnerability. "I thought you—" He stopped mid-sentence, took a deep breath, and tried to pull himself together. "Never mind. The important thing is, you're fine." Camilla watched him silently, trying to process this moment that, just a few weeks ago, would have been impossible to imagine. Khalid, vulnerable, in front of her, like a man struck by something beyond his control. But soon he pulled away, as if realizing that he had shown too much. He left the room without saying another word. In the following days, Camilla's routine returned to normal, or at least to the meticulous pattern he had created for her. But Khalid was no longer the same. There was something in his gaze, a quiet restlessness, as if he had doubts he couldn't ignore. He began to notice Camilla's silences, the long looks she gave her phone, the way she avoided questions about her past. The calm strength she had shown from the first meeting now seemed controlled. There was something she was hiding. Khalid was not a man who tolerated uncertainties. That same week, he gave a direct order to his personal security without any preamble. "I want everything about her. Every name, every transaction, every phone call, everything." In less than 4 days, the dossier arrived. 2 thick folders. The first contained Camilla's professional history, contracts she had turned down in the last 6 months, campaigns she abandoned without explanation, million-dollar proposals she had shelved. The second was more delicate. The name Arturo Rodriguez appeared on almost every page. Hospitalizations in specialized clinics in Switzerland, a rare neuromuscular disease, ongoing experimental treatment, and huge payments coming from accounts traced back to Camilla. She had declined invitations for fashion shows in Milan, campaigns in New York, and even an exclusive contract with a French brand, all to ensure Arturo received the treatment in time. And the deposits for the clinic, all made discreetly, almost always the day after the funds were released by Khalid. The impact was immediate. Khalid stood frozen in front of the open folders, unable to move. For several minutes, everything he had built around her image of a strategic, cold woman, motivated only by money, crumbled. This wasn't opportunism. This was sacrifice. The next morning, he entered the room where Camilla was stretching with the physiotherapist. He asked for everyone to leave. She stood up slowly, confused by his sudden presence there so early without warning. "What is it?" she asked, trying to remain calm. Khalid didn't answer immediately. He placed the folder on the table and opened it. Documents, photos, bank statements, and the name Arturo. Camilla turned pale. "You investigated me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I had to understand what you were hiding from me. Now I understand." She looked away, sitting slowly, taking a deep breath, struggling to hold back the emotions threatening to surface. "I didn't want your pity," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "If you knew about Arturo, everything would have changed. Maybe you would have thought I accepted the contract out of desperation, not choice, and I couldn't let that happen." Khalid stared at her for long seconds. There was no anger in his eyes, just respect. A different kind of respect, one born not from what she had done for him, but from what she had done on her own. "You gave up everything for him." Camilla nodded, her eyes shining but refusing to let a tear fall. "Everything." He remained silent, as if still processing the truth in front of him. "It was the purest thing I've ever seen," he murmured. And upon saying that, he realized he could no longer look at Camilla the same way. For the first time, they were stripped of formalities, contracts, and rules. There was only the truth, raw and undeniable. 2 days later, Camilla received a phone call from the Swiss clinic where Arturo was being treated. The chief doctor informed her that the experimental treatment would continue until the end with the best available team, and that all the costs had already been covered. His voice, which had previously been cautious, now sounded almost relieved. Camilla hung up, stunned. She ran to the upper floor of the mansion, where Khalid was working in silence, looking over papers in front of a glass wall that revealed the vastness of the desert outside. She entered without asking, without thinking. "Was it you?" she asked. Khalid didn't look up. He simply answered without rushing, "Yes." "But why?" Then he looked at her firmly. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because, whether you like it or not, Arturo is now part of my story, part of ours." Camilla tried to respond, but emotion caught her voice. He stood up and walked over to her, stopping just a step away. "It has nothing to do with the contract or what you did. There are no conditions. You've done more than anyone would have." His words hit Camilla with a mix of relief and confusion. She felt grateful, deeply touched, but also vulnerable. Khalid's gesture was more than an unexpected kindness. It was the definitive breaking of the wall he had built between them. Something shifted in that moment, a silent but visceral understanding. She could see it in his eyes. He saw her differently now, not as a woman he had hired to carry his child, but as someone who, in some way, had come to be a part of his life. And that shift began to haunt her. Camilla didn't know how to handle it. She was pregnant, in a foreign country, in a house that wasn't hers, and now emotionally involved with the man who had hired her to bear his child. She tried to fight against this feeling, but it crept into every gesture, every glance. Khalid, in turn, seemed to handle it silently, but practically, as always. Without explanation, he made an unexpected decision. He took Camilla to his private villa, in one of the most restricted areas of Dubai, by the sea. The property was isolated, surrounded by dunes and invisible security. In the distance, the calm sea looked like a lake. The house, if it could even be called that, was a modern, spacious construction with indoor gardens, fountains, and absolute silence. Camilla was installed in the master suite, with a view of the ocean, imported bedding, discreet works of art, invisible technology. Everything immaculate, everything cold. For the first few days, Khalid only appeared at night, dining with her in silence or exchanging a few words about the exams. He avoided direct contact, as if afraid of deepening their connection, and even surrounded by luxury, Camilla began to feel an emptiness that was difficult to explain. The solitude in that place was different. It wasn't the absence of people, it was the absence of meaning. Between the long corridors and massive windows, she started to question. What were they, after all? Two strangers trapped by a choice that was changing both of their lives. But now, without the protection of the indifference that had surrounded them before, everything seemed more fragile. Their relationship entered a delicate phase. Every gesture, every silence, every absence began to weigh more. Camilla no longer knew if she was still part of a contract or something that no one had the courage to name. She spent her days walking slowly around the villa's terrace, feeling the salty breeze of the sea on her face as the baby moved more frequently with each passing morning and night, as though trying to silently communicate with her in some way. The baby's movements were constant and, at times, almost violent. But Camilla smiled to herself. There was a life inside her, a life with which she conversed in her thoughts, making plans she couldn't articulate. The bond was beginning to form, not only in her body but in her soul. She no longer knew how to disconnect from that child, and that was what frightened her most. The contract she had signed months earlier now seemed like a distant, almost unreal piece of paper, a cold document in the face of the intensity that she felt inside her chest. Camilla knew she had crossed the limits of the agreement, not physically, not officially, but internally. She had already given herself over, and that was the mistake she had promised herself she would never make. Khalid, on the other hand, continued to remain in the background. He spent part of his mornings at the villa, talking with the doctors, ensuring everything was in order. Sometimes he sent fresh flowers to her room. Other times he swapped furniture for more ergonomic models. He even had a special bathtub installed after she casually mentioned that she felt uncomfortable when sleeping. He never said he was taking care of her. He never admitted he was paying attention. But she noticed every gesture, and that confused her even more. Despite these subtle acts of care, they kept their distance. Their conversations rarely went beyond short sentences, and the looks they exchanged carried more meaning than any word. There was tension, there was expectation, but there was also fear. Camilla was afraid to trust, afraid to want something that might never be within her reach. And deep down, her greatest fear was that Khalid would let her believe that it was possible, only to remind her later that it was still all just a contract. One morning, a mild pain appeared in her lower back. She ignored it, thought it was just another consequence of the weight of her belly, of the effort it took to get up, of her tired body. She took a shower, rested, did some stretching. The pain remained, but it didn't worsen. Until that evening. It wasn't until nightfall that everything changed. The pain intensified suddenly, catching her off guard. It came as a hot pressure that rose and fell, irregular but constant. Camilla tried to control her breathing, walked around the room, tried lying down. Nothing helped. A contraction came with such force that she had to hold onto the headboard of the bed to keep herself from collapsing. Her breathing quickened. Fear took over. This wasn't just discomfort. It was different. It was real. She knew her body, and now it was screaming for help. "Khalid!" she shouted, her voice trembling, desperate. "Khalid!" It took no more than a few seconds. The door flew open and he entered. He wasn't wearing his usual suit, but simple clothes, as though he had just come from a workout. His eyes, however, were alert. One look was enough to understand. He ran to her, taking her arms gently. "Is it starting?" he asked, without hesitation. Camilla could barely speak, but she nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "We'll handle this, now." Camilla tried to respond, but another contraction made her scream in pain. Without hesitation, Khalid wrapped his arms around her and lifted her with care. Her body trembled, and her uneven breathing caused her head to fall against his chest. He hurried through the mansion's corridors, ignoring the looks of the security team, the staff, and any protocol. This night didn't allow for formalities. The woman he was carrying in his arms was no longer just the mother of his heir. She was something more, something he still didn't know how to name. When they reached the car, he gently placed her in the back seat. He told the driver to get out of the way and took control of the wheel himself. The gate of the property opened automatically, and the SUV sped down the private road, going over 150 kilometers per hour. Throughout the ride to the private hospital in downtown Dubai, Khalid never let go of her hand. He held it tightly, yet gently, as though his presence could somehow alleviate the pain she could barely endure. The screams came in short intervals, and between them, silent tears ran down her face. "It's going to be okay," he kept repeating. "I'm here. You're not alone." Camilla tried to focus on his eyes, but her blurred vision made it difficult. The city lights passed by like ghosts, and every movement of the car seemed to intensify the pain. She squeezed his hand so tightly that her joints trembled. When they arrived, the medical team was already waiting for them. Khalid exited the car, even before it had completely stopped, and ran to open the back door. Two nurses approached with a stretcher, but he helped her out himself, holding her trembling body with an urgency he couldn't explain even to himself. "Premature labor confirmed," one of the doctors said after the first quick tests. "We need to act immediately." Inside the delivery room, Khalid stayed by her side as long as the protocols allowed. But when the team began to rush against time, the monitors beeped and the medical voices grew louder, he found himself being moved aside. And for the first time, Khalid al-Hassan, the man who controlled everything, felt powerless. He paced back and forth in the hallway, hearing fragmented technical terms: unstable pressure, hypoxia risk, rapid dilation. None of the terms eased the anguish in his chest. His hands were sweating, his shirt was wrinkled, and his face wore an expression no one in his business world or any of his allies had ever imagined him to show. More than an hour later, a nurse came out of the room and approached him. Khalid turned immediately, his eyes asking the question before the words came. "The baby is born," she said with a subtle smile. "It's a boy, healthy, all signs are strong." But before he could breathe a sigh of relief, she added, "Camilla is stable, but unconscious. There was a drop in her blood pressure during the birth. We're monitoring her. She will need time." Khalid didn't respond. He passed her by in silence, entered the room, and stopped. The sound of the newborn's cry filled the room with an overwhelming force. One of the doctors approached with the baby wrapped in a light blue blanket. He's waiting for his father. Khalid extended his arms without saying a word. He received the child with a care no one had ever seen him exhibit. But the absence of Camilla's consciousness in the room was a living absence, present and painful. He approached the bed where she lay, still and pale, her face still marked by the effort of the delivery. The doctors had assured him that she was out of danger, but the sudden drop in her blood pressure required continuous monitoring. The sedation would help in her recovery, but there was no estimate of when she would wake up. Khalid refused to leave. He dismissed the driver, his appointments, the phone calls. He took a chair and sat beside her. He turned off his phone. The only thing he did was hold her hand. And he stayed, for hours, sometimes in complete silence, other times murmuring words he didn't even understand. He didn't pray, didn't beg, he simply stayed. He watched every movement on the monitors, every slight involuntary twitch of her fingers, trying to interpret any sign as an indication of improvement. Meanwhile, the baby slept peacefully in an incubator on the other side of the glass. A small boy, but strong. The doctors were confident. He was breathing on his own, responding well to stimuli, and his heart was beating vigorously. It was the first time Khalid couldn't maintain control of the situation, and he hated it. The emptiness of not knowing what to do gnawed at him. Yet, he didn't budge. In the early hours of the morning, one of his personal assistants, Nabil, arrived discreetly. He carried a leather folder with a confidentiality seal delivered by a source linked to the Italian consulate. "Mr. Al-Hassan, there's something you need to see," he said hesitantly. Khalid hesitated for a few seconds, but slowly released Camilla's hand and stood up. He took the folder and opened it right there, standing by her bed. Inside, there was an unexpected dossier. Old photos, records of a disappearance, a birth certificate, newspaper clippings dated almost 30 years ago, the name printed on all of them, Isabella Maria di Benedetto, the daughter of an aristocratic Italian couple who mysteriously disappeared at the age of 7 during a trip with her nanny to Argentina. The child was never found. The case had been closed years later without any solution, but new DNA information accidentally crossed in an international genetic bank, which Camilla had used for one of her pregnancy tests, revealed an almost impossible coincidence. The genetic match with the Di Benedetto family was complete. Camilla Rodriguez, the name she had used her entire life, was actually the missing heir of one of Europe's most influential families. Khalid read everything twice. Then he sat back down. But now, alongside his concern, there was the weight of a new threat, the legal implications. Camilla wasn't just an independent woman with a difficult past. She belonged to a powerful lineage, and that changed everything. If the Di Benedetto family discovered her whereabouts, and they inevitably would, they could claim custody of the baby. They could invoke legal rights, take the case to international courts, use any loophole in the contract to challenge the legitimacy of what had been done. He ran his fingers across his face, trying to organize his thoughts. For the first time, Khalid felt something that rarely struck him. Fear. Fear of losing Camilla. Fear of losing the child. Fear that everything that had seemed safe and under control could collapse like a sandcastle in the face of the first wind. It had been almost 2 days since Camilla had remained unconscious, and he hadn't left her side. The dossier about her origin rested in his folder untouched since the last reading. The revelation was too big to be ignored and too dangerous to be shared without careful consideration. Should he tell her or not? The doubt consumed him. Part of him believed it was his duty to reveal everything. Camilla deserved to know who she was. She deserved to know where she came from. But another part, more protective, more emotional, feared the effect that such information would have on her. She had just given birth. She was still fragile, vulnerable. Wouldn't it be cruel to burden her with something of that magnitude? And worse, what if she found out from someone else? As he struggled with his own conscience, her breathing changed. Khalid immediately stood up. He moved slowly, as if afraid to alarm her. Camilla's eyelids fluttered, her eyes slowly opening, revealing a confused, tired but alive gaze. "Camilla," he whispered. She turned her face toward his voice. It took her a few seconds to understand where she was. She looked around, blinking slowly. When she tried to speak, her voice was low, raspy. "The baby. Where is my baby?" Khalid didn't respond with words. He left the room for a few minutes and returned with the little bundle in his arms. The baby slept peacefully, his head resting against his father's chest. Khalid walked over to the bed and gently placed the newborn in Camilla's arms. Camilla looked at the baby as if the world had stopped. Tears came even before the first smile. She stroked the baby's face with the backs of her fingers, unable to contain the emotion. She cried silently, without sobs. She simply allowed everything to flow, the fear, the pain, the relief. Khalid stood by, watching silently. He had never seen such a human, visceral image. And it was in that moment that he realized there was no more room for secrets. He could no longer hide who she was, not just because of the danger, but because she deserved to know the truth, not as part of a plan, but as a woman, as a mother, as a person. When she looked at him again, with the baby still in her arms, he sat down beside the bed. His heart was pounding, his throat dry. "Camilla, there's something I need to tell you." She furrowed her brow, tired but attentive. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "Your birth name isn't Camilla Rodriguez." She blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "Your real name is Isabella Maria di Benedetto. You disappeared from Italy when you were a child. Your family is part of the European aristocracy, and you are the heir to a title and a history you never knew existed." Camilla stared at him, not understanding at first. The baby kept sleeping in her arms, oblivious to the storm that was unfolding. She shook her head, trying to process it. This is impossible. I grew up in Madrid. I was raised by a simple woman. There was nothing noble about my life, nothing." The DNA confirmed it. A match was made by accident, through the pregnancy tests. The investigation was confirmed. "And your family has already been notified." Camilla couldn't respond. She just buried her face in the pillow, still holding the baby as if trying to protect him from everything. But the truth had already been spoken, and now it weighed on both of them like a new storm. If this is true, if I am Isabella, why don't I remember anything? She asked softly. My childhood was in Spain. My adoptive parents, they didn't hide anything. Khalid hesitated but answered carefully. According to the records, you were reported missing at the age of 7 during a trip with your nanny. She died in an accident a few days later. Your identification documents were switched. No one suspected. The couple who raised you, they probably believed they had legally adopted you. Camilla felt a tightness in her chest. Memories of her childhood flashed in snippets, her mother sewing at night, her father selling fruits at the market, the small apartment in Madrid, the laughter, the hugs, the fire. She looked away, lost in the past. They died in a fire when I was 14. The whole house was consumed. I escaped by a miracle. Khalid watched her in silence. This was no longer the woman of the contract. She was someone having her life turned upside down, layer by layer, without warning. Your biological family has been looking for you for decades, he continued carefully, but you disappeared from the records. Only now, with the DNA tests, was it possible to locate you accurately. And you, she interrupted him, looking at him again. You knew. Khalid took a deep breath. Yes. I found out right after the birth. I waited for you to wake up to tell you. That's not true, she countered, her voice cracking. You waited because you wanted to hide it, because you didn't want me to know. He didn't try to deny it, he simply nodded. I was afraid that once you found out who you really were, you would leave, afraid of losing you and our child. His sincerity hit her hard, but it wasn't enough. She felt her heart torn between understanding and the pain of his omission. You betrayed me, she said firmly. It might not have been with lies, but it was with silence. I know, he replied, his voice quieter. And that's why I'm telling you now that I won't stop you from anything. If you want to find your biological family, I'll take you myself. If you want to stay, I'll be here too, but I won't control anything anymore. Camilla stared at him, surprised. This was new, unexpected. The man who had always controlled everything now let her go. And our son. He will be with you, always. The choice is yours. She reclined, exhausted, but unable to relax. Her mind was spinning. On one side, there was a past that now called to her with questions without answers. On the other, the present. This room, Khalid, her son, the life they were building amid ruins. Camilla closed her eyes for a moment. She could feel the baby's scent. She could feel his breath. And even though she wanted to escape from the confusion, there was something there that held her back. The bond, stronger than fear, stronger than the truth. What now? She asked, almost in a whisper. What happens to me? To us? Khalid sat on the edge of the bed, his shoulders slightly hunched. He didn't look at her immediately, but his voice came steady, direct. What happens next depends entirely on you. I won't stop you from leaving, Camilla. The answer was straightforward, though spoken with an odd calmness. It hurt him, but he showed nothing. Camilla fell silent, the baby still sleeping beside her, as if everything in that room revolved around a single choice. Khalid took a deep breath and continued. If you want to search for your origins, I can help. I can contact your biological family, arrange everything, ensure that you reconnect with what you've lost. She looked at him in surprise. His voice held no bitterness, there was no manipulation. But if you decide to stay, he said, now meeting her gaze, I need you to understand that it will be because of love, not out of duty, not out of fear, not because of a contract. Camilla felt the air catch in her chest. This was the first time he had used the word love, without hiding, without distortion. And it was everything she needed to hear, and everything she feared. Her eyes filled with tears, but her expression was soft. There was no more room for masks. For a long time, I got used to fighting alone, she said, her voice trembling. Not depending on anyone, carrying everything in silence. But now, she looked at her son, pressing her lips to his forehead. Now I know I'm not alone anymore. Khalid moved a little closer, not touching her, but with a presence that was firm and constant. Camilla turned her face toward him, with a gentleness that contrasted with the chaos of the days before. You're giving me a choice, and that means more than any promise, she said, her voice thick with emotion. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was necessary. Both knew they had reached a point where no decision would be light. But they also knew that from this moment on, every step would need to be true. Camilla hesitated. She thought of the faces she didn't know, the blood that called her back, the life she could claim. But as she looked at her son and the man before her, her heart spoke louder. I won't leave, she whispered. Not now. Maybe never. Khalid closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing a truth he hadn't expected to hear. He moved closer and this time took her hand firmly. Then the contract no longer exists. Camilla smiled, touched. It never did, not in the way we imagined. The baby stirred, and Camilla held him tighter. Khalid's presence by her side, the warmth of that little life between them, the silence they shared, it was all new, but somehow familiar. There, in that sterile white hospital room, amidst unburied truths and healed pains, something had been born that no contract in the world could have predicted: a family. In the following days, Camilla's recovery was steady. Little by little, she regained her strength, still under medical observation, but her body was responding well, and her heart felt lighter. The baby, named Luca, surprised everyone with his health. He slept easily, fed without difficulty, and seemed to carry, even at such a small age, an inexplicable calm. With each passing day, Camilla felt more confident. Her looks still carried fatigue, but they were now accompanied by spontaneous smiles. There was something different in the way she looked around, not as someone who was trapped, but as someone who was allowing herself to belong. At the same time, news from Switzerland kept arriving frequently. Arturo was responding extraordinarily well to the treatment. The tests showed progress that had once been considered unlikely. His voice, which had once been weak, was regaining firmness in video calls. Camilla cried when she heard him say, "I want to meet my nephew soon." With medical discharge granted, Khalid took Camilla and Luca back to the mansion, but what had once been a cold, silent, immaculate structure began to change. The presence of the baby transformed everything. Sounds of laughter, crying, hurried footsteps of nannies, toys discreetly scattered in previously flawless corridors. The house was starting to pulse. It took Camilla a few weeks to adapt to the new routine. Sleeping in shifts, breastfeeding, learning to read the baby's signals, and above all, trusting that she didn't have to do everything alone anymore. Khalid's presence was not just constant, it was dedicated. He didn't just show up, he stayed. He spent afternoons in the garden with the baby in his arms, read reports with Lucas sleeping on his chest, learned how to change diapers, make bottles, and interpret cries. He was a man rediscovering himself, without shame in admitting that he didn't know everything. And that, for Camilla, was a real transformation. More than that, Khalid began to involve himself with Arturo. He organized his arrival in Dubai, hired local physiotherapists, and had a room in the house adapted for whatever his brother might need. Arturo arrived shy and skeptical, but he soon became enchanted with his nephew and, surprisingly, with Khalid. The conversations between them started short and practical, but they grew. Khalid listened, he asked questions, he showed interest, and Arturo, used to absence, responded with quiet gratitude. Camilla observed everything from afar, silently, trying to understand what she was feeling. This man, who had once seemed inaccessible, was now laughing, listening, carrying a baby in his arms with natural ease. He was no longer the same, and neither was she. She reevaluated her own feelings carefully. She questioned whether the affection she was feeling was gratitude or something more, whether the bond they shared was merely the result of living together, or if love, the kind she promised to avoid, had already found its way there, even without a name. Each gesture from Khalid showed that he too was changing, not only because of the baby, but because of her. Camilla still hesitated, it was true. She feared idealizing, surrendering, and making mistakes. But she could no longer avoid the thoughts about the future. A future with Arturo, with Luca, with Khalid, together. And when she saw him one afternoon, lying on the living room rug with Luca on his chest and Arturo sitting beside them, laughing at something silly, she felt it. Maybe that future was no longer an illusion. Maybe it was already beginning. It revealed itself in the simplest of details, in the sound of Luca crying in the middle of the night, in the bottles hastily prepared, in the diaper changes made amidst laughter and grimaces. The mansion, once silent and formal, had become a living space. The days followed a new rhythm. The presence of the child shaped everything. Even Khalid's steps had become softer, less hurried. Fatherhood was changing him. He was no longer the calculating man who viewed life through contracts and strategies. Khalid now woke in the early hours without anyone calling him. He could distinguish between cries of hunger, colic, or fatigue. He learned how to prepare a warm bath and gently cradle his son until he fell asleep. And he did all of this with a serene expression, as if he had finally grasped the value of each second. Camilla, in turn, was rediscovering a strength she hadn't known she had. Motherhood left her tired, but whole. She gained confidence in caring for her son, in making decisions, in sharing the routine with Khalid without feeling diminished. For the first time, she felt she could lean on someone, without fear, without shame. The days were filled with unpredictability, colic, sleepless nights, toys scattered around, diapers forgotten on the table. But it was these small challenges that brought them closer. There was no longer any distance between them. No more unspoken words. The intimacy grew in shared silences, in lingering glances during diaper changes, in muffled laughter in the early hours when the baby woke up for the third time in an hour. Khalid, more comfortable with this new life, began to involve Camilla in other aspects of his world. He introduced her to trusted people, his personal lawyer, the assistant who had been with him for years, the manager of the family's philanthropic funds, not as the mother of his child, nor as the woman of the contract, but as a partner. Camilla noticed the care in his words, the way he included her in conversations. She felt respected, seen, heard. It was new and precious. She began to participate in informal meetings, in decisions about social projects Khalid planned to launch in the name of their son. They discussed the household routine, Luca's education, even the menus. Everything with ease, as if she had always belonged. And indeed, she did belong. It was during an ordinary afternoon, with sunlight streaming through the windows of the mansion's library, that a letter arrived. The envelope was thick, sealed with a golden crest. The paper bore her name in formal handwriting, Isabella Maria di Benedetto. Camilla hesitated before opening it. Luca slept peacefully on her chest. Khalid, sitting beside her, flipped through a hardcover children's book. When she opened the letter, the world seemed to pause for a few seconds. It was an invitation from the Di Benedetto family. They were requesting to meet her. They didn't demand anything, didn't pressure her. They simply wanted to see her, talk, look into her eyes. And they were waiting for her in Tuscany, at the historic estate where everything had begun. She slowly tucked the letter away and gazed out the window. Luca was still sleeping, and Khalid remained by her side, attentive but silent. "I'm going," she said at last. Khalid merely nodded. He didn't question her, didn't suggest caution, didn't ask for guarantees. "I know," he replied, "and I'll take care of everything so you can go with peace of mind." She had expected resistance, or at least some hesitation. But what she found was calm support. That was what disarmed her most about Khalid, the recent ability he had developed to offer space without pulling away. The trip was arranged discreetly. Arturo chose to stay in Dubai with Luca, ensuring Camilla could live that moment without pressure. She traveled with documents, medical history, and only a few clothes. She didn't want to seem like a guest of luxury. She wanted to arrive as she was, a woman in search of her own roots. The car passed through the gates of the Di Benedetto estate on a clear morning. The green of the vineyards stretched as far as the eye could see, and the main building, made of stone and light wood, seemed frozen in time, waiting for her. They welcomed her with restrained emotion. No one rushed, no one cried out. It was as if respect spoke louder than anxiety. An elderly woman with white hair and a regal bearing embraced her silently. She was the paternal aunt, Antonia. Other cousins introduced themselves gradually, with shy smiles and eyes that sought to understand without intruding. During the days that followed, Camilla listened to stories. She saw old photographs, baptism records, letters, VHS tapes of family gatherings. One painting in particular struck her, a portrait made just before her disappearance, showing her as a child beside her parents. The recognition of her identity came quietly, but undeniably. The original birth certificate, the records of her trip to Argentina, the search documents, they were all there. With every paper shown, with every memory shared, Camilla felt a void slowly being filled. It wasn't a replacement of the life she had, but a reconciliation with the part of her that had been interrupted too soon. But even amidst the wide hallways and rustic beauty of the Italian house, Camilla knew exactly who she was. And when she spoke with one of the older cousins, who mentioned the possibility of resuming the use of the official name, Isabella Maria di Benedetto, she responded firmly. "I am Camilla Rodriguez. This is the name my parents gave me, the ones who raised me, the ones who loved me. Arturo carries this name, and everything I am today comes from them." The cousin merely nodded, respectfully. He didn't insist. There, in that moment, she wasn't choosing between two identities. She was uniting them. On her last night in Tuscany, Camilla wrote a brief message to Khalid. "You were right. Part of me was here, but now I know this is where I belong." That final night, as she watched the sunset through the golden vineyards, Camilla understood something essential. The heritage she had rediscovered was no longer a weight, nor a mystery to be solved. It was simply a part of who she was, not her destiny, not a burden, just another chapter, now complete, of her own story. She wasn't returning to Dubai seeking escape or shelter. She was returning because she chose to. Because, for the first time in a long time, she felt that she belonged to both worlds, the one of her origin and the one of her present. But it was in the latter that she had decided to build her future. The jet landed discreetly at dusk. Khalid was waiting for her at the hangar, holding Luca in his arms, dressed in a light linen shirt and his attentive eyes, as if wanting to read her expression before she said anything. Camilla descended the steps slowly. She carried a small suitcase and a different look, firmer, more complete. When she saw him, she smiled, and he, without thinking, walked toward her. "You're back," he said, his relief unmistakable. She nodded, touched. "I'm back better," she replied. "More whole, more me." Khalid handed Luca to her, and she embraced him with the care of someone reconnecting with a piece of her own heart. The baby laughed, recognizing his mother's scent, clinging to her hair with his small, restless hands. Still holding the baby, Camilla looked at Khalid with sincerity. "Thank you," she said, "not just for letting me go, but for showing me I could. You didn't hold me back, and that's why I chose to come back." He didn't respond with words. He simply touched her face lightly, with a gesture that asked no permission. It was the touch of someone who knew that, from that moment on, there would be no need for contracts or conditions. That same night, sitting in the garden lit by soft lights, Camilla and Khalid talked about what they would become. No clauses, no unrealistic expectations, no papers. Just them, with everything they had become. They sealed a new commitment, not signed, but lived. A silent pact of care, presence, and truth. The months that followed brought a serenity neither had known. Time was no longer measured by meetings or international flights. Now the days were measured by Luca's first words, his unsteady steps, his toothless smiles, and the nights when sleep only came in the arms of his parents. Camilla began to write small pieces about motherhood, about personal reconstruction, about identity. She didn't publish anything. She kept it all in a leather-bound notebook, as if preparing something for Luca to read in the future. Khalid, for his part, divided his mornings between the company and hours dedicated to their son. He learned that there were meetings that could wait and decisions that didn't need to be made immediately. The time spent with Luca was irreplaceable, and he knew that. The baby grew surrounded by love, by presence. He knew no rush, no absences. He knew his parents' scent, recognized the sound of Uncle Arturo's laughter, loved the warmth of his mother's arms. The mansion, once a symbol of power, was now a home. The hallways echoed with new sounds, of life, of bonds created not out of obligation, but out of affection. Camilla now had no doubts. The woman who had arrived in Dubai as part of an agreement could never have imagined that she would leave the shadow of a contract to build there, with that man and that child, something that no clause could have predicted. A home. The mansion, once silent and marked by rigid routines, now pulsed to a new rhythm, the one only a truly alive home can have. The sounds of small footsteps echoed through the hallways, mingling with laughter and voices crossing each other in the late afternoon. The home built without intention now existed by choice, and it was real. Over time, Khalid and Camilla found the balance they never thought possible. Their relationship was firm, yet light, based on respect, built day by day, without hurry or demands. They had been through it all, distrust, contracts, hidden truths. But now, what bound them together was transparency, and the freedom to be who they truly were. Khalid, still carrying the public image of the relentless man, now arrived home earlier. He had learned to divide his time. Important meetings took place in the mornings. The afternoons were dedicated to Luca, to Camilla, to the garden that slowly took shape with her ideas, and to the simple dinners prepared by a team that came to respect not only the boss, but the man behind the name. Camilla, in turn, rediscovered parts of herself she had left behind. She resumed some career projects, not in fashion shows or magazine covers, but in campaigns she chose for their value, not their visibility. She used her image to speak of real motherhood, of identity, of new beginnings. She created a line of sustainable products with her own name, proudly saying that her priority was to be home by 6 in the evening to put Luca to bed. Arturo made frequent visits, always receiving the same treatment as any family member. He had his own room, decorated with items that Camilla and Luca had chosen together. With Khalid, their relationship was calm, filled with silent exchanges, late-night conversations, and a kind of complicity that grows when two men so different understand the value of caring for the same woman, one as a brother, the other as a partner. The past, though healed, left its marks. There were times when Camilla fell silent in the face of certain memories, and days when Khalid still got lost in the demands of a world that no longer fit with all he had become. But these memories no longer paralyzed them. They simply reminded them of where they had come from and everything they had been through to get here. Luca grew up surrounded by love. He ran clumsily through the house's corridors, tripped over toys, learned words in 3 languages, and laughed easily. He was a curious boy, full of life, and his presence seemed to reinforce daily the decision his parents had made to break free from the patterns that had shaped them. One ordinary late afternoon, Camilla and Khalid sat in the garden. She had a book in her lap. He, with his eyes closed, felt the warm breeze on his face. Luca played on the grass, laughing loudly with Arturo, who was making airplane sounds with his arms outstretched. "I never thought it would be like this," Camilla said, breaking the silence. Khalid opened his eyes and looked at her. "Like how?" "Calm, real, ours." He smiled, taking her hand naturally. "We've been through so much, but maybe we needed all of it to understand what really matters." She nodded, squeezing his fingers between hers. "Love was born from the unexpected," she said softly, "and it blossomed when no one else believed it was possible." There was no need for a response. They knew. They felt. The family they never imagined building now existed, not perfect, not ideal, but deeply true. And in that place, without contracts, without written promises, without masks, Khalid, Camilla, Luca, and Arturo had finally found what they had been searching for their entire lives without even knowing it: a real family.